Today we're going to have a bit of a chat about the relative strength of each Space Marine chapter, what I think their strongest aspects are, and which ones I feel are the best. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. So in this video we're going to be mainly focusing on the competitive game, and we're going to try and put the chapters in some sort of rough order, starting with the ones that I think their rules aren't quite as strong at the moment, and moving towards the ones that I think that are the height of the meta. I will say at the start though, that I do think that this list doesn't have all that much between the very top ones and the very bottom ones. They're all Space Marine chapters, they all get combat doctrines, they all have decent access to a wide variety of units, and all of them have their own unique aspects that do add something to the army that none of the others get. I certainly don't think that you can't win with the ones that are a little bit weaker, but it just might be a bit more of a challenge than picking some of the higher ones. Naturally, if you disagree with any of the placements on this list, please let me know down below and why. It's definitely a subject that's open to a discussion. I've divided them roughly into 4 different tiers, so we'll start at the lowest with tier 4. So the ones that I've chosen to put here are the Black Templars and the Crimson Fists. For the Black Templars, I think unfortunately they just don't have the strongest combination of chapter trait and doctrine. Their chapter trait isn't bad, re-rolling charges, it's pretty handy out of Deep Strike, but it is something that most Space Marine chapters have decent access to, because they can use things like chaplains with litanies, or select successor chapter tactics or something, or some like the Blood Angels also get their own benefit to charge as well as other buffs. Their Assault Doctrine only helps them once they're in close combat on turn 3, so it's a bit late, and it's not as strong as the other Assault Doctrines. They also lack things such as Librarians, and don't seem to have quite as many of their own unique special rules. For example, they have a few less stratagems than most chapters. Having said that, they do have some of their own nice tricks. Naturally, they'll be fairly potent in melee, particularly against infantry, and one of their strongest tricks is having a stratagem to be able to lock an infantry unit in melee with the Black Templars unit, meaning that the opponent can't just fall back and shoot them. A couple of their special characters can be pretty handy, particularly the Emperor's Champion and Chaplain Grimaldus, who are very decent value point for point, and they have a couple of decent relics in the Crusader Helm to access the Assault Doctrine early, and one that can give units around it a 4+ invul save for a single turn. Could be good for weathering an initial alpha strike. They still definitely have their tricks, but I'm afraid I don't think that these tricks are quite as strong as some of the other options on the list. I also chose to put Crimson Fists down here, more because I think they're pretty much directly superseded by Imperial Fists for the most part in the more competitive game. They get almost all the same options as the Imperial Fists, but I just don't think that their +1 to hit against Horde units is quite as good as the Imperial Fists Ignore Cover, which I think just comes up in more situations and is more relevant. They also lose access to the Siegebreaker cohort and have to pay more command points in if they want the Eye of Hypnoth. They do have a couple of their own perks, including Pedro Cantor, who is a decent buffing HQ, but he does also have a price tag to match at 150 points, so I'm not sure he's even necessarily an auto-include in every Crimson Fist list. I do also quite like their relic Power Fist, the Fist of Vengeance though, and you can build some pretty powerful smash captains with them. They'll certainly be very good in some matchups, particularly when you're fighting hordes, but I think that this is just a little bit less reliable than their Imperial Fist brothers. Moving on to tier 3 then, where I've actually chosen to place the majority of the Space Marine chapters that we'll talk about. First up we have the Death Watch with their new souped up combat doctrines and access to some of the Space Marine Codex strats. These guys have absolutely insane deep strike anti-infantry firepower, and I think they are really strong. Those combat doctrines plus Hellfire rounds will make a short work of virtually any non-vehicle target. You can also get some very efficient kill teams, both of veterans and intercessors. Both units can mix and match to make the most of the offense and defensive powers. They can also deep strike aggressors, which is always helpful, and you can pull off some first turn deep strike shenanigans with the Beacon Angelus. The main reason that I put them here rather than higher is that they really do struggle from anti-tank a little bit. I think they are really just strongest when they're coming out of deep strike with those special issue ammunition shots. I just don't think they're quite as good when starting on the board, and in any full army you're going to have some units do that. I think that they're actually stronger as allies by quite a long way, and if I was considering Deathwatch as allies, then I'd probably just put them as tier 2. Being able to insta-delete a ton of infantry really is no joke at all. Next up we come to White Scars. These guys have some very hard-hitting melee, particularly if they can make it to their Assault Doctrine on turn 3, which gives them a mighty +1 damage on the charge. They can build some of the hardest hitting smash captains in the game with a combination of this, gold warlord traits and decent relics. They have some solid stratagems for getting them there too, including a charge buffing one and outflanking things like Centurions or Aggressors. I think they could be even better if bike heavy strategies were a little bit more viable, but unfortunately for a deep strike heavy hitting melee army, then I think that they are just a little bit subpar to Blood Angels in this way, who can both deal very strong damage and also get there a bit easier with their stratagems. Next up we come to the Ultramarines, who do have quite a lot of good things going for them. Their aggressors are excellent, being able to move and double tap in the tactical doctrine. This is also very handy for bolted discipline for things like intercessors. They have a warlord trait that can allow them to redeploy units at the start of the game, which is always handy for foiling your opponent's deployment strategies. A relic that can allow you to reroll hit rolls and wound rolls against a given target, meaning they should be able to take down at least one enemy unit very easily. And a very large cast of characters, including Primarch Rabute Gilliman, Marnius Calgar, Librarian Tigurius, and Chaplain Cassius. I feel the Ultramarines are really quite a well-rounded army. They'll do fairly decently with a bunch of different armies, but the main reason that I just haven't chosen to rank them a bit higher is that they seem to have a bit of a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none situation going on, where they're just generically fairly strong, but don't tend to punch massively above their weight in any one area. Also, their chapter trait isn't really the most helpful, just being able to fall back and shoot. Next up we have the Salamanders, who I've always found really quite an interesting chapter. These guys, unlike the Ultramarines, I think have a lot of random raw strength going about, a stratagem that allows you just to get +1 to wound with any shooting attack. They can also move and double tap aggressors with another one, and have some interesting ways of dealing a ton of damage with flame or melter weapons. Their psychic powers are strong as well. Being able to add 1 toughness and -1 to hit for a given unit can really keep it safe. They've got an Obsidian Aquila for a 6+ Feel No Pain type aura, and they can get some very stacked tough characters that are hard to kill and deal a decent amount of damage. Their Master Artisans type rerolls are really handy, being able to reroll 1 hit and 1 wound per turn, which just raises the damage output generically across their army. So on paper they really do have a lot going for them. I think their issue is that they really do tend to pull in a lot of different directions, and it's sort of hard to know exactly how all this comes together in an army. I think that one of their most unfortunate things for them are that Melter and Flamer weapons are just a little bit subpar at the moment compared with other options, meaning that with their boosted doctrine, even then they just about limp into okay. They also aren't particularly mobile as a chapter, which can make it hard to deliver these close-range, hard-hitting units. Sadly, their rerolls also aren't unique to them, and you can get Master Artisans with a successor chapter, meaning that if you want the reroll, you can still have it, and have access to some of the options of other chapters. Next we come to the Imperial Fists, a chapter that was absolutely stomping the meta until very recently, but I think have been hit very hard by the Doctrine nerf. Now their very good Devastator Doctrine is only limited to turn 1. This gives them +1 damage to vehicles and buildings, and really made a lot of their heavy hitting options just insanely strong at removing tanks from the battlefield. I think however their chapter trait is very strong, getting extra hits with bolt weapons like the Crimson Fist is great, adding Norse cover on top of that really can shut down a lot of your opponent's defensive abilities. They also have the Eye of Hypnoth, which is basically like a lieutenant for shooting attacks that you can buy in for the cost of 1 command point, and their very scary Siegebreaker cohort, which can give you another outlet to stacking a ton of mortal wounds on vehicles. Unfortunately for all of this, the rest of the options in the codex just aren't super strong. Their psychic powers are very underwhelming, and their stratagems, relics and warlord traits, while being reasonably useful, just aren't quite as good value as some of the other chapters I feel. Next up we have the Space Wolves, who have of course gained quite a lot from Saga of the Beast, including combat doctrines, their own unique one in Savage Fury, and a bunch of other melee orientated stratagems. Space Wolves really have great melee, and again are very scary to be facing in close combat between their chapter traits and very good stratagems. They have a ton of unique characters and really good options for buffing them and making them stronger, such as Touch of the Wild and Seeking a Saga, which allows you to make any one character an absolute beast in close combat. In particular, Ragnar Blackmane is an absolute murder machine from Saga of the Beast, with 10 attacks with good strength, AP and damage on the charge. They also do have a few shooting tricks, including being able to ignore modifiers, and their unique melee unit in the Wolfen both combine good movement, decent defense, and brutal damage output, all things that you want in a close combat unit. Space Wolves' main weakness is that they will struggle to get into melee just a little bit more than Blood Angels again, and this can make a game a bit of an uphill experience for Space Wolf players. I'm not 100% sure that Saga of the Beast has fixed this, but it has made their melee stronger. Last for the Tier 3 chapters, we come to the Dark Angels, who again did cop a bit of a nerf from the Devastator nerf, meaning that they can only get their extra range on turn 1. I feel that the Ravenwing elements for the Dark Angels are pretty strong at the moment. They can make a decent little character cluster with Samael and Sableclaw, a Talon Master or 2, and then give a ton of rerolls and ignores cover to a whole load of Ravenwing units around them, maybe including things like Dark Talons and Black Knights. They also have the Weapons of the Dark Age to really soup up their plasma fire for a unit, and that can be a decent way of dealing damage. and with their recent Ritual of the Damned update, there's an easy way to get Deathwing into combat provided you have some bikes about. For all this, I do feel their trait is just a little bit weak. Rerolling ones to hit isn't bad, but it comes at the cost of movement, which is a significant downside and makes you a lot less flexible. The extra range is also kind of helpful, but when it's just for the first turn, it's really not that big a deal compared with the other Devastator doctrines out there. Let's move on to Tier 2 now, where we have just 2 armies on this list. We've mentioned them a few times already, but the Blood Angels are up first. I really do think that Blood of Baal gave them a new lease of life. They are a touch monodimensional. I feel their most competitive strategy is the delivery of large units of Sanguinary Guard or Death Company straight into the heart of the enemy. But these guys really do pack enough of a punch where they can pretty much gut half an enemy army in one turn if they're left unchecked. On top of this, these guys fly, have great movement, and have excellent stratagems for getting them into close combat, whether that's deep striking and using a 3d6-inch charge, or starting on the board turn 1, and using on Wings of Fire to jump across the board, meaning that you can get first turn charges that way. Red Thirst absolutely cuts things up in close combat, and now it also has +1 to charge built into it as well. It just makes them that bit even more reliable for getting there. They also have a really strong cast of characters, with unique characters such as Mephiston, Lamartes and Asterath being incredibly strong at buffing and also decent fighters in their own right, and you can build some of the best smash captains in the game with the Blood Angels, potentially having 2 guys running around with damage 4 Thunderhammers, extra attacks, and +1 to wound. I really quite like the option of Mephiston and the Librarian Dreadnought as well, who are some of the only units who can cross a really long stretch of table and also make a charge. And the 6-inch Heroic Intervention for any Blood Angels unit stratagem is a really big buff to them. It means that the enemy has to back off from all their units, which can give them some positioning and objective scoring issues. I do feel that Blood Angels are one of the slightly more high skill armies to use, as if you leave these big units of Sanguinary Guard or Death Company around to get shot, then they will go down in pretty short order, and you do somewhat need to make the most out of the fight phase with good positioning and looking for opportunities to tri-point units. They do also hurt a little bit for decent long-range fire support, but that can be allied in from other chapters without really hurting them too much. The other army I've chosen to put in Tier 2 are the Grey Knights, and I certainly wouldn't have seen this coming a good 6 months ago. I feel like Grey Knights are a little bit monodimensional as well, having one incredibly strong build in the Paladin Death Star list. It's won a fair few tournaments already, and I'm sure it'll be with us into the future. It's basically 2 10-man squads of paladins who are Terminators with 3 wounds, and then just layer an obscene amount of buffs on them, where you can make them virtually unkillable, and also deal a decent amount of damage, both in the shooting phase and in the fight phase. You have options for reducing their damage, making them -1 to wound, and they can be -1 to hit and always in cover from their Tides of the Warp. They also have the option to switch up the gameplay a little bit and turn into a very strong smite spam army at the drop of a hat by changing to the appropriate tide, or potentially go heavy on the psi weapons or psi bolt ammunition, where they can get a ton of strength 6, AP -2, damage 2 storm bolters out of a paladin squad, and psi cannons get even nastier. Their HQs are pretty decent with the amount of buffs that they can provide these units. Particularly Drago is a pretty decent deal, being strong in combat, giving 4 rerolls and also psychic support. And the Nemesis Grandmaster Dreadnought is always a solid option, being able to combine some of the decent bits about being a character with an immensely fighty profile. I'll admit that most of the rest of the codex isn't all that hot, particularly their vehicles who don't get Tides of the Warp, and some of their power armoured variants aren't quite as strong as some of the others. Focusing on the top tier of their lists though, then they are very strong in the competitive game. Finally, we come to the 2 chapters that I think are the strongest at the moment, and these are the Raven Guard and the Iron Hands. It's no surprise that to see the Iron Hands up here. They have been up here for quite a long time really, since their codex dropped, despite multiple sets of nerfs. Despite all that's occurred, they still have that insanely strong infantry build going on, with Iron Father Phyros and a Chief Apothecary, providing a ton of intercessors or aggressors, with a 5+ invul save and a 5+ feel no pain, meaning that virtually no unit in the game can kill them efficiently. On top of this, their chapter tactic is just generically strong, 6+ feel no pain across the board. Better overwatch and slower degrading on vehicles is great, and it usually makes them the chapter of choice for vehicles. Their doctrine is still very good, even though it's only limited to turn 1. It gives you a very nice alpha strike, and means that you can position all of your units optimally, and you get the reroll 1s for heavy weapons across the board turn 1. Their other options are also decent. They have the Ironstone to subtract 1 from the damage rolls for a vehicle, and you can just make it a massive pain for your opponent to remove 1 vehicle per turn, the one that's the most threatening. They've got the Tempered Helm for some decent command point farming, and their stratagems and powers are solid as well, allowing you for extra accuracy or repairs for vehicles, Cogitated Martyrdom to protect characters, better overwatch, and the very nice one where you get extra wounds on 6s, provided you focus fire. Despite the multiple changes made to their book since they came out, I still feel that Iron Hands are one of the strongest options. Next up we have the Raven Guard, who were one of the strongest competitive chapters to survive largely unscathed from the Space Marine FAQ. These guys can use some very crafty infiltration and deployment stratagems, most notably being able to move a unit of aggressors straight up to the front of your lines turn 1 and then go absolutely nuts with Boltstorm gauntlets and decent melee. And they can deep strike Assault or Devastator Centurions, getting these incredibly close range dangerous units right up front, which helps to avoid their weakness of slow mobility. Their chapter traits and unique doctrine are both decent as well. Always being in cover is actually really good for vehicles in the army, and infantry can also profit from that when they also have 3+ saves or better, or even be -1 to hit when in cover. Their unique doctrine also makes Eliminators even stronger than they normally are, which isn't bad at all as they're one of the most competitive units in the Marine book. And for 130 points, Strike is an absolute steal, with very decent melee and the powerful Chapter Master rerolls. They have a lot of strong stratagems as well for once you do get up close, allowing them to fall back, shoot and charge, or give them extra bonuses to charging and getting into close combat. Raven Guard also work pretty well as successor chapters, getting a bit of extra range on any deep striking Centurion flamers and things, and perhaps picking up the traits for +1 to charge as well. Overall, I think they're a really competitive Space Marine army, and are very scary to face on the table. So let me know your thoughts and opinions on the list, and if you think anything should be rated differently at all. I know that this one's got a heavy dose of opinion on it. It's been largely based on the sort of armies that I'd be most tempted to run in a competitive tournament, and I've tried to let that guide the list. If you've enjoyed, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics for more content like this every day. And if you're watching regularly, then feel free to support the channel on Patreon, as the Patreon support is what keeps the channel going and allows me to focus this much time on making videos. As well as supporting new content, there's a chance to get access to videos early before anyone else, voting on what sort of videos come next for the channel, and also the occasional prize draw where I post out some miniatures to one of the Patreons. If any of that sounds interesting to you, then please give the link in the description below a click, and a big thank you to my current Patrons for helping make this channel possible. Thanks again for listening, I'll hope to see you guys next time.